For those of you who have been in part of this language learning community for a while, most of you will have been exposed to all of the different smartphone, tablet, and computer applications and programs that you can use in order to learn whatever language you could dream of. Now, some of these apps are really pretty good, and some of them are not so good. That's going to happen no matter what end of the spectrum you're on. No matter what language you're studying or anything like that, you are going to have good and bad. It's just, that's what's going to happen. Now, the other day, yesterday actually, my schedule gets really out of whack. I was talking with my wife a little bit about language learning. I was kind of talking with her about some of my ideas, some of the things I wanted to do, some of the other languages I wanted to learn. We were just kind of batting things around because I go to her for a lot of advice about things like that. She generally helps me keep a level head about things and keeps me from jumping the gun and going, oh, I want to learn this language. She's one that sits there and goes, but you haven't even learned Japanese yet, and you haven't even learned German yet, which are the kind of the first two languages that I had intended on learning. So thankfully she does that for me and keeps me kind of on the ground here. So as we were talking, we got to talking about the fact that she used to know and be able to speak a fair amount of Spanish, like quite a bit of Spanish. She used to be able to stand most everything. And then she used to be able to speak a lot too. Where she grew up was pretty much an entirely Mexican Latino neighborhood. It was all Mexican and Mexican descended kids, all of whom spoke mostly Spanish. Knew English, but spoke mostly Spanish. And spoke Spanish around her. She was one of the only non-Spanish speaking children for like a few blocks around. And since she didn't really go far, that's what she was exposed to. And then she also had classes during her time in middle school and high school, is what she told me, where she was actually learning Spanish in those classes because that was required. But since then, she had kind of lost it, and then she gained a speech impediment due to anxiety, which is not fun, and it has actually made it so that she cannot speak Spanish. And so as we were talking about this, we got to talking about some of these smartphone applications and whether or not she would be able to use one of them to just kind of essentially do a refresher for herself and try to be able to understand more Spanish again, and just kind of be able to get herself back up to the point where she could understand it even if she wasn't able to speak it. And the app that we ended up talking about the most, really mainly focusing on, was Duolingo. Now Duolingo, for most of you should know, probably about 80% of you have Duolingo downloaded on your phone at this moment, whether you've used it or not. Duolingo is one of the most popular smartphone applications to use for language learning. And there's some good reasons for that. One, it's free. Unless you buy the premium version, it is free. You just have to deal with some ads and stuff like that. The premium version, as far as I understand it, is not hugely expensive, but is also, from my experience, it might have changed since I was last using it, because it was a couple of years ago at least. But from my experience, the premium version was just not worth it. There wasn't enough for me to warrant me getting the paid version. So now I have mostly mixed feelings, mostly negative, but also mixed feelings about Duolingo. Now, most of this stems from the fact that Duolingo does not teach in a way that I actually learn best. Duolingo teaches you essentially by constantly giving you multiple choice and or fill in the blank, that type of thing. Sometimes you kind of type things out. Gives you that kind of quiz type thing all the time. It'll introduce a word and then it's like, hey, what's the word that goes with this picture? And you have like 2 to 4 options that you select from. I can review that way, but I don't learn that way. And most people don't. It doesn't activate the correct portions of your brain. There are certain portions of your brain that need to be activated rather, when you are learning. And there are some of them that need to be activated when you are reviewing, essentially, when you are looking at knowledge that you already know. and you are trying to solidify it. That's a different part of the brain. And the way that Duolingo teaches doesn't activate the correct side of the brain, the correct portions of the brain. Especially for me. I cannot learn from Duolingo. I remember next to nothing from all of the German that I did. I did a large portion, like about a third, somewhere between a third and a half of the German tree when I was doing German. And I remember pretty much none of it from there. I remember a couple of words that I kind of liked, like der Käse for cheese. I remember krank for hospital, because I loved that word, krank, and Krankenhaus, which was hospital, I learned later. See, I liked those because they were interesting words. They sounded funny or interesting or anything like that. But for the most part, I don't remember anything out of that application. I don't remember how to say a lot of things. But yeah, it just comes down to, it didn't help me learn. It was just a way for me to review. The words that, or the things that it helped me to actually learn, so to speak, were things that I'd been exposed to in other areas, in other applications, or from hearing something from my wife's best friend's mother, who is German, who immigrated from Germany years ago. I would hear something that she said, or something that was said on her German radio that she has playing most of the day at their house, or something like that, or a German TV show, because there's some really good German TV shows on Netflix. I would hear some of the words from there, and then I would see it in Duolingo, and then I would remember some of that, because you're using different portions of your brain. But that's one of the biggest flaws I see for Duolingo, and it's one of the main reasons that I don't recommend Duolingo to anybody, and don't use it myself. Now, there is, however, an instance. It's like I said, Duolingo's not all bad. There is an instance where I think Duolingo actually is really, really good for people to use. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Duolingo specifically. You can do the same thing that I'm about to tell you. You can do it in Babbel. You can do it on Memrise, with the free version of Memrise. You can do it on really any of the kind of basic ones that follow that same structure, because let's be real, Duolingo, Memrise, and Babbel all teach in essentially the same way. Babbel's the only one that kind of strays from that path a little bit, which is nice. They just never had the languages that I had wanted to learn. They had German, but not Japanese. Now, with these apps, like Duolingo, the best thing that they provide is a way for you to expose yourself to just a little bit of a bunch of different languages with like a free trial, or like you get the first lesson free, or the first 7 days are free, or something like that. Or in the case of Duolingo, it's just completely free anyway. But you get the ability to look at those other languages and listen to them, and you see the words, you see any of the scripts, like in Japanese, the hiragana, katakana. You have the pinyin, and Hanzi? Chinese characters. You can expose yourself to those. You can expose yourself to the Korean script and things like that. And it allows you to actually go through and see and look at a language and go, do I like the sound of that? Do I like the look of the language? Do I like the Chinese characters? Do I like the Japanese characters? Do I like these Korean ones or the Arabic ones? Do I like the characters? Do I like the way it looks? Do I like the way it sounds? And and a really big one for me too, that you have to add on, is, do you like the culture? Which you have to do your own research for that. But Duolingo and Memrise and all these apps, they are really good at exposing you to that language just a little bit, so you can hear it, you can see it, and you can then make a judgment based on that as to whether or not you actually want to learn that language. Because if you don't care about that language, you aren't going to be able to learn it. I mean, eventually you will. It's going to take a really, really long time. It's going to be extremely difficult. And it's just not going to be a good thing. But that's one of the things that you can get out of those programs, is figuring out which language you want to do. And that's essentially what I use Duolingo for. I have Duolingo on my phone. I just re-downloaded it after my conversation with my wife yesterday, simply because I wanted to look at a couple of the languages that they have on there and kind of decide what language I might be leaning towards doing next. Do I actually want to learn German once I get to a high enough level of Japanese, or would I rather, switch gears and learn Korean or Mandarin Chinese instead, or I'd rather go over here and learn Spanish or something of that nature. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm, going to all of a sudden start making videos about studying other languages or anything. I'm still planning on, at least for the foreseeable future, focusing entirely on Japanese. I have considered starting to pull in, maybe doing like some off days and studying something out of like maybe a little bit of, like, say, Spanish or something like that, but just something that, maybe once a week that I do, just to essentially start exposing myself to a new language, so that when I get to a certain level of Japanese, I then turn and have a good foundation to start with for the other language. I haven't decided that yet, but that's the kind of thing I use Duolingo for. If I decide, hey, I want to look at a little bit of Spanish and just kind of look at a few words, see how much of it I remember, because I also took Spanish in high school for 2 years. It's boring at the time. I didn't really care for languages at the time. I didn't think I did. But so that I can use Duolingo to look at Spanish, look at a few of the words, remind myself of the ones that I do know, maybe come across some ones that I don't know, and just be able to kind of build a base of some vocabulary and stuff that I can then use to continue on if that's the language I decide to go with, that type of thing. But I'm still entirely focused on Japanese. If I think that any of that is going to interfere with my Japanese, I'm not going to do it. So the bottom line here is that Duolingo and applications like it can be really good if you are a pure beginner, you've never been exposed to these languages, anything like that. They're very good for you to be able to get, like I said, get exposed to it, start to hear the language, start to see what it looks like, and things like that, so that you can decide, yes, this is a language I want to learn, this is what I want to invest my time in, this is what I want to invest some of my money in to get some better programs. For every language that Duolingo offers, there are way better resources out there to be able to learn that language. All it takes is a little bit of research, a little bit of time, and maybe a little bit of money. That's all it's going to take. So once you decide what you want to do, then go ahead and make that leap. But always make sure that it's something that you are going to be truly passionate about. Make sure that language is something that you are going to have a fire in you to want to learn, have a desire to learn that language. Because if you don't have that fire, you're not going to get as far as you want to. You'll be able to learn some, but not as much as you would be able to otherwise. So, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. I intended to keep this a little shorter. It's got a little longer than I kind of thought I was going to, but that's okay. So as of right now, I don't have a plan for next week's video. I will be working on that through the rest of this week, but I'm sure that I will have something decent to put up for you next week. So with that is all for me for today. So thank you all for joining me this week, and until next time, let's get out there and immerse.